Hey there, this is Dan. You're watching The Salty Sea, and this weekend we completed our first real big week of Warcry 2.0 tournaments, really getting to know what it's like in the heart of Ghur, trapped in the depths of the Gnarlwood. And to talk about it, I thought I'd bring on some folks from the Dayton Warcry Club. You can check them out. They have a YouTube channel. They're going to be on a bunch of podcast platforms pretty soon as well. They've been going for about 6 months now, and it's pretty exciting. So I've got Warren and Dave here. Warren, can you say hello?
Hey guys, how's it going?
Hey,
Uh,
and oh yeah, and Dave. We've got Dave as well from the group.
Hey, how are you guys doing?
And tell me a little bit about your channel and yeah, what you guys are up to.
in Dayton, we had a group of folks that kind of fell in love with Warcry, is getting back into skirmish miniature games, and I had the bright idea like, hey, there's not a lot of there's not a lot of content creators out there. You were pretty much the only game in town, and we have some of our own takes. We have a group chat, a small group chat that's super active, and we want to get some of our ideas kind of out there as well. So that was kind of the start of it, like trying to do some deep dives into some of the theory, because we believe that even though it's a very simple game, there's a lot of strategic depth underneath the surface. And lately, what we've been doing, in addition to the content, is actually starting to organize local meetups. So actually, just 2 weeks ago at a local store, we had 13 people for a local meetup, either experienced players, players new to the game, or that he maybe played a little bit in 1.0, and folks interested in the game looking to get into it. And we're going to keep on expanding that with at least monthly meetups in the local area. I'll start trying my hand at organizing like a tournament. Right now, it's just sort of like loose, uh, just some like loose, like just matchmaking going on. But we're gonna add a little more structure to it as we go. So that's why these tournament things are really interested. I'm really interested in seeing those from a bystander standpoint to see like how this all kind of uh, progresses, evolves moving forward.
Yeah, and I'm really excited to hear that that you guys are sort of also, setting up sort of a gaming community around it too, beyond just kind of being really into it. I know basically until 6 months ago, it was basically impossible to play Warcry outside. The way that that's been changing and seeing different communities start to organize, you had 13 people in one place playing. That's really awesome, and mostly unheard of outside of big conventions. Other than one tournament we'll talk about now, and of course the Polish group is pretty legendary as well. But yeah, that's really exciting to hear. Anything else you want to kind of run through before we get into it?
I so we also have Dave on. Dave's been on the cast before, one of the stalwarts of the group. Zach and Fred couldn't make it tonight, but I got to give them a shout out, and also Joel. Kind of the core, the core members of the group that we have. We can't do it. It's a group effort. I'm kind of like the lead producer for the channel, but there is no real leader. It's kind of like a group effort. Zach's been big into terrain, knocking out Ghur terrain. Fred is like our lead theory crafter, list builder. Has a huge collection of war bands, and so we have a lot of different characters, personalities, and strengths in the group.
I like to think I provide the everyman perspective.
All
Like,
right.
all right, guys, what's good? All right, I'll try that.
Yeah, he's Dave's super solid, consistent showing up, and that's valuable too.
To circle back to the first thing I said on the show, we had a pretty exciting, weekend of tournaments. I was at the Nova Open, had a really good time, and then they also had a pretty decent sized little tournament in Oslo, Norway. And the cool thing about it is to have kind of two parallel games go on, tournaments go on, and hilariously get basically the same result. So I figure we'll talk first about the two winning lists. Now, of course, I'm exaggerating; they're not the same at all, but they kind of both went with this kind of Gloomspite core of a Brugit and two Nettas for the cheap guys, and then basically they just differed in their hammers, but they both just took from everywhere in destruction wherever they wanted, and it seemed like it worked really well. When Justin was doing really well with this at Nova, Justin Orton is a friend of mine who, you know, piloted this list to win the Nova Open. I think a lot of people were pretty confused. Anyone who hadn't seen it run yet was pretty confused about what was going on with the list. So let's talk about it. Warren, you got to take a look at it while he beat me up in the finals. But
Yeah, I
yeah.
saw it on BCP on Best Coast Pairings
Hmm.
before the matchup, and I was looking at it, and I didn't know what he was thinking at first either. I thought he was just throwing some random stuff together and just playing the tournament for fun. But no, Justin, I will say, is arguably probably the best warband list builder out there in the community.
Hmm.
Anything he builds has been like straight fire, like meta breaking straight fire.
Yeah, and pretty wild stuff too, in that he puts things together or tries things that other people wouldn't necessarily try. Now, of course, this isn't a very good example of that because someone else did try it. But you know, in the finals, he told me that I beat myself because he came up with it from some things I said, but they were like things I said in vastly different videos that I didn't connect the dots for at all. And he kind of, yeah, he connects dots that other people wouldn't necessarily
You
do.
lay out the concept and he refines it to a sharp edge.
Yeah, and way better than I would have even thought. Like, and he'll take multiple concepts that people will say and not realize that you can put them together, and he put this together. Now, um, Captain Awful is, as he's known apparently in both online community and in the Norway community, put together something very similar for their tournament. And I kind of want to break down how these work for folks um, who maybe see these two lists and are thinking like, what is going on, right? So, um, and I'll just start with kind of my thoughts on it, and then you guys can kind of riff off of that. So, my first thing is he's starting with chaff that has actual roles. Now, there's two things going on with the Gitz chaff. They all three, you know, both lists played them, but the Brugit and the two Nettas, they have the ability to both put out like go forward and do really impactful abilities, with also coupled with the fact that one, they don't cost that many points, so you're not heartbroken if they die, and two, they have the reaction that can help bring basically, and if it's the loon boss or the grunta boss, both players had at least one cavalry piece, can basically teleport a hammer pretty far across the board. I think 8 inches in both cases, 8 inches across the board to get into combat if you come in and attack them. Now, a lot of the times, just the threat of that forces you to play around it and just forces you to sequence differently than you normally would. And so, no matter what, from what I was seeing, basically, when I was playing against Justin, for any given role, he could either have a whole bunch of doubles and then be threatening all of these incredibly impactful doubles across the board, whether it was the nets, whether it was the Loonshine Potion, whether it was Charge. The Oslo list has the same thing, but replace Charge with Might Makes Right, which is also an incredibly impactful ability. Um, so he could threaten that everywhere unless he had an opening roll where he rolled a natural triple, in which case, you know, you just casually put a wild dice on that triple and then you have a rampage, which you never complain when you have a rampage. So it's this ability to have any of the hammers, or they're more than just hammers because they're these massive sort of titan pieces. It's not just running and doing damage, it's running and then winning any fight, both in terms of your durability and your hitting power. Having these big Titan pieces married up with the incredible sort of tricksiness that the cheap Gits bring, that was kind of a match made in heaven, I think, for both these players. What did you guys think watching them and then theory crafting about the list afterwards?
Well, yeah, I think you hit a lot of good points there. Um, the thing I wanted to mention is, when you talk about the utility of all the doubles that you have for those. Um, Oftentimes people ignore that. They just throw the best pieces together, but they don't consider like what their plan is for doubles or triples. They could have like a super triple hungry war band and not get the full use out of it,
Yep.
or or something like that. So that's really interesting to see. And then the other part is, you mentioned the hammers, right? The Tyrant is like probably like, I want to say, like, if not the best, one of the best, one v one fighters in the game. And
Absolutely.
you mentioned they're talking about the Gitz hammer fragility. Uh, Peter Mercencavage played Gitz again, and he was going more squig hopper heavy. And he had mentioned that his squig hoppers lost a point of strength, lost a couple wounds, and just those little nerfs makes them nowhere near as dangerous. The quad got nerfed as well, but uh, you when you're not instant killing with your squig hoppers, now they're getting hit back, and those hammers are a lot less durable, so you can't count on them, and losing one's a big deal. So yeah, the orc and ogre hammers, much less vulnerable to that.
Yeah, and for people who don't know, Peter Mercencavage was took second place at Gen Con, came to Nova, actually won his first two rounds, and then actually lost to Justin in the semifinals in basically what you said of just coming up, and he wasn't able to leverage his reaction well against Justin's sort of giant pieces because um, those gets, hoppers would get some real good damage in, but then they would eventually lose the fight, right? Because they just didn't have the wounds. Um, Now I think this the loon boss is a lot less killable than the squig hopper boss is. So I think that was probably a good inclusion for the list that won in Oslo. But yeah, just going straight gets pretty difficult when you consider what you can do with Gits. Now, he did very well in the tournament, up until that point because the Gits reaction, the Gits hammers, they are good. It's just this kind of supercharges the list into kind of a different tier, basically. So the other kind of cool thing here is that we're going to find this to be maybe more of a theme with these lists, but these chaff models also, they're really valuable even in missions where chaff is supposed to be a liability, right? We played Reaper in our tournament. I don't know what the missions were in Norway, but what's cool about these is that they can essentially protect themselves with their reaction when they're in Reaper, where it's hunting season on them, and they also you know, sometimes it's going to be worth it to actually run them forward, get them killed, but then, you know, the ability, especially on the Brugits, if your Brugit dies, but it supercharges your Mega Boss to just kill something really valuable that turn, that's 100% worth it. So I think that that's a really interesting sort of bit of dynamics to consider with just with these
Yeah,
lists and going forward as
like
well.
sacrificing small pieces, and then you're
Hmm.
setting up your big guys for a counter charge, and you're going to take out the valuable pieces and win in the end.
Right, right. Just having something to do with your small pieces when you're in a mission where normally they'd just be a liability. All right, so I want to go into the second place list at the Nova Open. This was a monster list. So starts with an abhorrent Ghoul King. Those have come down to 165 points now. Then we have the Terrorgeist, a Crypt Horror, and five ghouls. Have either of you guys played around with monsters yet?
I saw a Gorgon be played a little. No, I'm sorry, a Gargant be played a little
Hmm.
bit. But no, I think all of us have them picked out and coming, but
Hmm.
not necessarily in hand yet.
What did the
The
Gargant look like when you? I don't
Oh, it
mean
was the
like
Gor.
the paint job. Oh,
It
okay.
was the Gorgon. It was a nice looking Gorgon though. I I
Yeah.
believe it dominated the game uh, that it was played in though.
Yes, I believe that is the case.
Yeah, I've been
Yeah, that
looking. The Gorgon, in terms of points efficiency, is pretty incredible in terms of the amount of damage it does. Doesn't have the flying keyword, but um, yeah, pretty scary model.
it's the one that has the rampage though. If you roll a quad, it has its own rampage.
Mm. Which is hugely important for monsters since they only get one activation at a time. So I also got to play against this list. I did win. He took second over me because he ended up getting more tournament points in his games that weren't against me. But kind of some interesting things going on with this list. One, I thought having a decent number of activations seems like it's really key with monsters.
Yeah,
And you know, 8 is not a ton of models, but it is a reasonable amount. Um, and then also, I think it's good to have at least one other, quotes thing or just some kind of power piece that isn't your monster in your list. And I thought having this Chosen of the King combo, because the way he played it was his Ghoul King and his Crypt Horror were in a deployment group with one of the ghouls, and then the other four ghouls were in the other deployment group. So he gave up on having a hammer in one of the deployment groups to have sort of his big scary monster and then one combo group that was sort of going for this Chosen of the King sort of damage explosion strategy, which I thought was really interesting.
yeah. You have a really strong plan A. You have a decent plan B. You don't really
Hmm.
need a plan C at that point.
Right.
Uh, Mathematically, I like abhorrent arc regents a little more than Ghoul King,
Hmm.
but I see there's that need to keep the body counts up, and so yeah, if you're going to shave points and go for Ghoul King and the Crypt Horror combo there, that's good enough, I think.
Yeah, because he was even hoping to have a zombie dragon, but he was just so nervous about body count stuff because a zombie drag. Because I think this list is at exactly 1,000 or pretty close. Um, so he went down to the Terrorgeist to have another ghoul, um, and I think that was pretty important for him. I really wish I'd gotten to see some of his games that weren't the one that I played in, because it sounds like some of them were not close whatsoever. So I think this Terrorgeist really kind of had its way with the tournament, other than just one game where it kind of faltered. But otherwise, yeah, it seems like this list was incredibly successful.
So
What?
yeah, Terrorgeist is definitely on my shopping list here because I play Flesh Eater Corpse.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, what are your guys' takes on, this list didn't win. It did lose a match, but with how effective it was overall, do you guys think that this placing is, you know, Jason, for folks who don't know, he also went 3-1 at Gen Con. This is absolutely a player who knows what he's doing. Is this just kind of a solid list in the hands of a solid player is going to do a solid job? Or do you guys think that this is kind of heralding sort of
Monster meta.
a tide of monsters to come?
I
I,
think
I'm
monster meta has been pretty much the topic of our conversation since 2.0 kind of dropped. Was
Hmm.
was that the direction it's going in? Everybody seems to want to try it, so I think we're going to see a lot of lists with monsters now. Success. We'll see.
Yeah, I'm watching it very carefully from all these tournament results. Like locally, I my philosophy is usually a laissez-faire, hands-off philosophy, right? If it's in the game, play it.
Right.
However, if we got new folks coming in and monsters present a negative play experience, like win or lose, all your games are about the monster. Do you deal with the monster? If you deal with it effectively, like you did in your game, you win. If you don't,
Hmm.
you lose. And I'm not sure that's a play experience I want to promote. I'm curious to see what other TOs' opinions are of this as well. It might be, it monsters and allies were pretty much like soft banned in 1.0, right? It was just kind of
Right.
recommended by GW. Yeah, no monsters, no allies. I'm curious to see how this evolves over time. If there's like just a group consensus or like gentlemen's rules saying, all right, yep, no monsters at the tournaments. Just let's play some good, fair, honest Warcry.
Yeah, and I'm interested too because um, one of the things you said just then was sort of win or lose, the game is about the monster. I definitely found that in my game. Basically, I put my entire warband into the monster, and I was able to take it down, only losing about 225, maybe 250 points of models, which the exchange ended up essentially being worth it. And that was essentially what won me the game, right? Is basically you put your whole warband into the monster. Do you lose the monster's equivalent in points before you kill it? If so, you're in a great position for the last 2 rounds. If not, or if you don't kill it at all and you're kind of quagmired by it, then you're in a terrible position, right? Which I could see that getting old pretty quick. I also wonder about feel bads for I was thinking to myself, one way to kind of deal with monsters if you're worried about them overrunning the meta is you just have tables that are like they do this in Kill Team, where a third of the tables are light terrain, a third of the tables are medium terrain, and a third of the tables are dense terrain. In dense terrain, it'd be really, really difficult to place a monster anywhere. So then you're looking at this situation of, if I take a monster, do I get lucky and just never have to play on dense terrain? Or do I get lucky where I play on dense terrain, but the one place I could put my monster down happened to be a pretty important place for the mission, like there was an objective there or something? Um, or do you get kind of unlucky and it's like, well, I played 2 games on dense terrain and the one spot I could put my monster was never near an objective, so I kind of just was out of luck. Um, I wonder, yeah, to what you said, I wonder where the feel bads are. But I certainly wouldn't want to do anything myself about it until I'd played a few more events that had, say 3 or 4 out of 10 or 15 people bringing a monster. Dave, I think you said something. Whether it's the meta because it's the most competitive thing you can be doing, or if it's the meta because people want to try it, we're gonna see some monsters in the next few events.
And there's a cool factor too. Monsters are cool. They're big. They're cool looking. They're fun to paint.
Hmm. Yeah, I think at least until people play them a bunch, I think people are going to be really interested in trying them out. And a lot of them have interesting abilities. I know Justin was telling me about the Charybdis that can net every model within some like absurdly long distance. From I can't remember now if it's 6 inches or if it's equal to the dice roll. That might be it as well. But either way, it has this massive net that nets everyone around it, which could, theoretically net almost an entire warband. So pretty exciting. I don't know how I'd feel getting on the other end of that. Um, so yeah, it'll be interesting to see people try these out. So this is really interesting because this is something that I was sort of worried about my list being soft too before Nova, and nobody really brought a super sort of tightly tuned Stormcast list to Nova, but we did see this in Norway, and it was pretty exciting to see. So there's a lot of really cool stuff going on here. Starts with an Annihilator Prime, just like a big combat piece, and then a regular Annihilator, and then 3 Grand Hammer Annihilators, and then a Tree Rev Scion, and a High Sister from Tempest Eye. I am just in love with using the Tree Revenant ally here. I saw Tree Revenants be incredibly effective both at Adepticon, and there was a list we'll talk about from Nova where Tree Revenants were incredibly effective. So bringing that into other lists for that teleport, even though you're paying way more for it, the Scion is at least harder to kill, right? And it's just worth it, right? If the ally mechanic lets you do it, go for it. And Annihilators are really good at fighting, but they're crying out for movement shenanigans, and this list went all in on sort of giving them what they need. What do you guys think?
So the Annihilators are they're 3-inch move guys too, right? Like
Right.
the Warriors, the Paladins.
Yep.
Yeah, so it gets around, right? It's a way to get around the movement there. You had mentioned the teleporting tree rev ally. We've also seen some talk on the Discord, like if you're playing Death, allying in what's the good unit in Night Haunt that
Oh,
teleports?
the Dreadblade
Dreadblade Harrow.
Harrow. We will, yeah,
Yeah,
we will see a Nighthaunt Dreadblade Harrow ally list for sure.
yeah. So having that piece of utility is useful there too. So yeah, I didn't realize that. Yeah, they had a leader version of a Tree Rev Scion. There was a hero or a hero version that you could take. So that's pretty neat. There's one thing I learned from some of these lists is like, oh, I didn't know you could do that, and then
Yeah.
it gives you more food for thought and iteration.
Yeah, I mean that's the exciting thing about kind of the first weekend of tournaments is people coming up with stuff that we didn't, which is great to see. I'm also just assuming here that the High Sister, now she's an archer, has a little bit, so she's like the Black Guard, I think is the name of the 125 point archer, but for those 20 points, I think you get a couple more wounds and you get 3 inches of range, which if you've just got the extra room in your list, why not? I think having your movement piece be a ranged unit is pretty savvy for this list because you don't have a sort of flying mobile hammer or anything like that. And, the flyers in Tempest Eye aren't really something to write home about. So bringing in a shooter, um, I went with a old guard for my ally, and I don't regret it at all. But for this list in particular, I think bringing that shooter, I think was probably a pretty good choice.
I'd be curious to ask the pilot, if that was the reason behind the High Sister, or if this the model that they had.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Looking at it, because you could certainly take a cheaper ally. Your old guard is 110, and you have one Annihilator with a Meteoric Hammer with range 1. The Grand Hammers have range 2. So if you're really concerned about the range being like probably the next best thing you can get on a move 3 guy,
Yep.
you could go with a cheaper ally and get 4 Grand Hammers and just spam those. Um, that said, there's probably a reason for the range or additional movement on the High Sister perhaps.
Yeah, it's curious, right? I mean, she is 5 inch move, 15 inch range. Um, Maybe the shooting came into play, or like you said, it could be a model availability thing. Annihilators come in threes. This pilot might have only owned
Ah,
3 Grandhammer Annihilators, right? It's like these are my Annihilators for my starter set, the Meteoric Hammer ones, and here are the Annihilators I bought separately, and they're the Grandhammer ones. Um, you just never know looking at these lists without finding out from the pilot. So I'll certainly put out some feelers to try to find out what it was. And sometimes it's like careful planning over the course of weeks.
yep.
Sometimes it's sort of shrug, and it actually worked out for the best anyway. So who knows? But I think it's a really cool list, and I think uh, the reason I was excited to talk about it is I think that Stormcast in general have a lot of play this season that they never had before. Um, and this is a list full of, we've talked about kind of the nightmares of playing lots of mid range models. This is a 100%, well, maybe the Annihilator Prime's not a mid range model, but other than the Prime, this is a 100% mid range warband. Um,
But it's, yeah, 7
yeah,
models though. Primarily Stormcast warband with 7 models.
yeah,
That was unheard of in 1.0.
absolutely. Hmm.
With 7 solid models, that is, not
Yeah,
like filling it out with Ether Wings.
right. Right, and so I think that's really exciting, and I think that this edition could be kind of a totally different world for Stormcast. I also played a 7 model Stormcast in the narrative event at Nova. It was really fun. It was not meant to be competitive at all, but it worked really really well. despite having 0 abilities in the entire list, I only took Vindictors, which don't have any rune marks, so I didn't have a single ability to use, but it turned out fine, right? So I think, bringing a Stormcast list that actually has real play to it, I think for people who can kind of tune lists and find innovative stuff, I think there's a lot to go with. And I think this list looks super net listable to me. Like, I think that you could bring something really similar and go for it. To be honest, I think all 4 of the lists we've seen so far, I think people could practice a couple times and find success with. I haven't
That
seen.
yeah,
Yeah.
that FEC, that's the FEC Start Collecting box right there.
Oh my God, is it?
Yeah,
It is.
the
It
Start
is,
Collecting
isn't it?
box has a
Hilarious.
Terrorgeist / Zombie Dragon and a Ghoul King riding it.
Oh my God, I'm so happy about that. Oh, I wish I'd put that as the title. Yeah, this is the Start Collecting box list, and it's really good. So people should people should try it out. Um, but I feel that way about this list too. Obviously, this list is much harder to put together, but I think people are going to find that it works really well. So now shifting back to Nova, this is my list. Um, I went. My leader was a Mizzen Master. I brought in a Thunder Prime with Grand Stave. Had an Old Guard, which is a Tempest Eye ally. 1 Arcanaut with the Spear, and then 5 Arcanauts with pistols. Watchers of my channel have already heard me talk about this list for about 15 minutes of their time. So I'll kick it to you guys. What are you guys thinking?
So I know you mentioned that you only had so many Arcanauts with pistols.
Mm-hmm.
Fred saw your list and he said you got to have more. You got to spam more guys. What he was kicking around was something like 13 model lists or something like that with KO.
I
Now
find those.
that probably means 1 hammer instead of the 2 that you have though. So it's a different list, different concept.
Yeah, I think that those are playable. The issue is, and the thing I'm really interested in for those super spam heavy lists is, what do you do on the missions where chaff is a
Reaper,
liability, right?
or like Reaper, right?
Right. Reaper is the best example. There's a few others where it's not great to have chaff, but Reaper is the biggest one where I'm not sure how you win if you
So I
if
guess
you do
I
that.
guess you got to play test it to see how it plays out.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Now, granted, this is 1.0 and it was a different game and a different warband, but we looked at spiders and we tried to
Yep.
set up a playtest game, which was the worst possible playtest game for spiders, or one of the worst ones we could imagine. So it was um, not Reaper, the predecessor for it.
Yep.
Trophy kills.
Mm-hmm.
Ogres versus spiders on trophy kills, and you would think that you would be massively disadvantaged with spiders in that, and it did fall behind quickly, but it eventually caught up on
Yeah.
trophy kills just due to attrition. Now, dwarves are not spiders, but you kind of have to you kind of have to figure out, okay, what really happens, how does it play out. It's one of those things where like you can look at it on paper and predict what's going to happen, but sometimes I just have to see it in action just to kind of get a real understanding for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Back before they nerfed um, giant rats, I tried a pestilence all chaff list that was just giant rats and plague monks. And this is plague monks were better than two. They were 10 fewer points than they are now.
Yep, the 70 pointers.
Yeah. And at that time, that list was really strong in Reaper because um, I mean, back when Pet Meta was just messed up, is basically what this is about 1.0. Because no one could ever catch you'd think that the giant spiders would be, or sorry, the giant rats would be big liabilities, but nobody could ever catch them. And then, you know, the plague monks move 6 would just surround everyone and just start beating them down with their little staffs, and then the one plague priest I had would, pop lead from the back and just blow everyone up. These dwarves that move 3, it's really hard to escape. Now, when I played Reaper, my old guard was um, my absolute MVP, just like basically sort of putting Arcanauts in the car and driving them out of threat range.
Yeah, he could lead the retreat.
Yeah, he would lead the retreat and just like run away all through Reaper while my Mizzen Master and Thunder Prime fought things. And the Arcanaut with spear. Don't sleep on the one with the spear. That does a lot of damage.
No, yeah, point for point, he hits hard. He's up there with like Graveguard in terms of like points efficiency.
Yeah, he's pretty wild. I actually think going for a, I mean, the conversions, it would just be exhausting converting this many spears because they only come one to a box. But having a list with 6 or 7 of those spear guys, I think could be something that would be really interesting. So I do think the full swarm lists have play. But man, never underestimate the power of having multiple mobile hammers in a list. I just think both the Thunder Prime and the Mizzen Master were just amazing for me all weekend. So, and maybe it's just a thing where both versions of it are totally viable and just completely different lists. But yeah, I think this version was solid. I am interested to see people test the other version.
Yeah, I like Justin's thoughts there on the chaff though too. It kind of goes. You did an earlier video a long time ago talking about big models versus small models. Like if you had 2 models that they lose effectiveness over time, or there's the whole overkill thing, like the advantages of like chaff models versus mid range versus big models, heavyweights.
And the
Now they
overkill
sort of,
thing
like,
that you mentioned, just so that viewers who haven't been watching for a year and a half here is just that when you, and this is something that, to go really in the Wayback Machine, that Rito used to talk about, which is that whenever you kill a chaff model by a lot more than the wounds it had, think of that as kind of wasted damage, so that chaff are actually much more durable than they look like on the box, because the amount of total damage you have to put into a ball of chaff to kill it all is just way more than the total wounds, just because you keep overkilling them, because it's hard to make your damage kind of go out the way it should. Whereas big models, like when I was fighting the Terrorgeist, I found that the 50 points of damage I had to do it passed a little quicker than you would think, just because it's your entire warband going into one thing, and it's just like the entire combined strength of your warband. So the big models aren't as tanky as they seem, but like you were gonna say,
the Terrorgeist is rolling its attack and it's dealing 20 to a KO guy, and you're like, fine, right?
Yeah, exactly. The one issue is, on big hammers like the Thunder Prime, like that Mega Boss or that Tyrant that we saw before, they don't bracket down with their damage the way a monster does, or the way a chaff ball does, right? Because you do 24 damage to my 5 Arcanauts. Well, you probably haven't, but you potentially kill 2 of them, and now they're doing a lot less damage. Whereas you do 24 damage to my Thunder Prime, and you're bracing for impact as it responds to you. So those kind of real different dynamic there. And I think that there's really interesting places to kind of go for the give and take between the two.
Yeah, it's something we're going to kind of address probably in the deep dive we do later. What's changed in 2.0, like how do the weight classes change, stuff like that. There's different ways you can kind of sort the fighters in 2.0, and that's one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. One other thing I just wanted to mention with this list, that I might not have mentioned in my first video about it, is Swift as the Wind and Fight for Profit. They seem like they fight for dice because they're both triples. You can't really have 2 triples in a round very easily. I just wanted to mention they come up in 100% different scenarios. Like, I actually never used Fight for Profit at Nova, but I did use it a bunch of times in testing. It's just, when you're in a big team fight, you don't need Swift as the Wind. And that's when Fight for Profit is usually at its best. And then, the opposite is true going the other way. Anytime when you really need Swift as the Wind, you really aren't thinking about Fight for Profit much. Yeah, so just a note for people. This is a list I do think people should try out, if anyone's got the models.
That alternate build, I'm looking at the alternate profile for the Draca line.
Oh yeah, the 330 point version.
Yeah.
So the one thing I like
Okay, but
about it is it
so
does
that
roll more
version, he's
dice.
got 5 attacks, 5 strength, 2 5, instead of
Hmm.
4 attacks, 5 strength, 2 6. So the additional, you're saying the additional attack evens out the variance a little bit.
It evens out the variance a little bit. It maths to a little bit more damage, not a ton. Like an Arcanaut with Spear and the one with the Grand Stave, the math on them is more total damage between the two models than for a pistol and the sword and stave, but it's just more like reliable coming
Yeah.
from your main hammer, and so I could see people wanting to do it that way. The other one, I think, you can also downgrade to an Achillean King. Achillean Kings are really good,
Yep.
and that frees up 10 points. Now, are Achillean Kings as good as Dracolines? I think that takes maybe more testing. People should try them both out. I think there's a lot of kind of tinkering right on the margins that you can do with this setup.
Yeah, the same core, right? You just pick other big hammers to kind of go with based on play style or what you got.
Yeah. The only thing I would caution people is make sure your hammers are fast. I'm gonna do a lot of talking later in this video, and maybe miss some opportunities to talk about some really good slow hammers and what can be really strong about slow hammers. But this list, because your chaff is so slow, you need your hammers to be fast. Yeah. So if you're going to downgrade, like you could say, I want to downgrade the Thunder Prime all the way down to a Knight of Zeros that's only 250 points to open up, room for way more chaff. That's fine, but don't downgrade it to say, one of those various like 225 point Stormcast beaters, because
Right.
it's just the wrong
You
list for
also
those.
you also want your hammer to be durable though too, right? You talked about this in your report.
Yep. In the finals, I basically lost because I misplayed my Mizzen Master. Because now, that's the point of the Mizzen Master, is it's a sort of a glass, not a glass hammer or cannon, but like a glass scalpel. But you can't misplay with it. You misplay with the Mizzen Master once and you lose. And I made one mistake with my Mizzen Master the whole tournament, and that was the one game I lost. So yeah, so you do want at least one of your chaff pieces to be very durable. Um, you definitely can't go in with only glass chaff, which is what we also learned from the Gloomspite versus Destruction Soup match. Is that those those thick boys, especially some of those slow Titany models, they can really have their way with some of the flying pieces if you're not careful. All right. So this is a wild list, and I honestly don't know what to think about it. This came in third at Oslo. It was undefeated because it took a draw. Goes with an iridescent horror, which is the pink horror leader. It has 4 pink horrors, and then an ogroid thaumaturge. If I had seen this before the tournament, I would have accused it of being a narrative list and just completely dismissed it. But it did pretty well. Now, we are on a small sample size of tournaments, but what do you think? Does this list make you want to investigate just how strong the change to split really is? Or yeah, what are you guys thinking with this list?
There was, well, when we heard that pink horrors went up in price, and we heard that they might be good, and we saw our local store has a bag of them used, and we were both openly considering like, do we get these? And they'd be easy to paint up, quick win, add it to the collection.
Yep.
I don't know, and I saw this list made got third. I actually hadn't sat down to actually examine the profile on the pink horrors. I'm looking at it now in front of me. I mean, for 135, the damage and the hit points aren't there, but again, it's the split thing, and I think it's one of those things I'd have to see in action to really understand and understand the power of.
Same. I think for 135 points, when you look at the blue horror profile, if you think of each pink horror as you're paying 135 points for 2 blue horrors, that is worth it. the question is, can you make that happen, right? Uh, if you play against mostly elite lists, maybe you can, right? Because you kind of need activation advantage to make that reaction work, or at least that's what I would have thought. But this person did very well. The only other thing I wanted to think about was, maybe is the Ogroid Thaumaturge a big part of the success here? I don't think of it as one of the scariest combat pieces in the game, but it does have, 225 for that profile is not completely unreasonable. And Brutal Rage is another one of those abilities where it's hard to know exactly how strong it is because it stacks on itself. It's like an onslaught that never goes away. Um, I don't know how, like, putting, like, Dave, putting yourself in the opponent's shoes against this list, would you sort of give the Thaumaturge a wide berth when you play against it? Do you think that would kind of put fear in you, or would you just play your normal game against it?
I would definitely give it a wide berth. But then I'm also an Ogroid fanboy, so I respect all Ogroids that I see.
Sure.
But the other thing, though, is if you try to give it a berth, I mean, it's ranged attack is not something you can just ignore either. So
That's true.
it's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation.
Yeah, that ranged attack does have double the range that they usually do too, because usually that's what the 7-inch ranged attacks look like, but they give it 15.
I also just like the pink horrors. I'm definitely all in on trying a horror list eventually.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm curious.
All right, you're committed.
I also have my Oops All Ogroid list that I'm going to get one day.
I hope so. I mean, this is totally far afield, but seeing that Slaves to Darkness box, um, I'm not super into Chosen. I think they're decent, but I'm not like especially excited about them. But finding out what that Ogroid team ends up looking like in Warcry is, I'm definitely waiting on pins and needles to find out because Ogroids traditionally are like a really huge part of the game, right? The Ogroid Myrmidon was like the face of 1.0. I mean, was supposed to be. I think the Spheranx was the face of 1.0, but yeah, I'm really curious. Yeah, to see how those goes, and I'm really curious to see this Thaumaturge in action too. I know I underestimated the Dark Oath abilities at first. I even played the Dark Oath abilities and didn't think they were good, but then other people seem to sort of really love them and get a lot of mileage out of them. I know we haven't seen Dark Oath Savagers in competitive play much, but you hear a lot of anecdotes that they're much more playable than they would seem. So I'm curious about Brutal Rage as sort of a permanent ability, right? Like, do you get into a fight with the Thaumaturge? I mean, it's tough, right? It gets into a fight, it takes a bunch of damage. Brutal Rage has to be enough to kill whatever it's fighting, or else it just takes a crackback and dies, right? But once it's got multiple stacks of that on there, it just becomes an absolutely terrifying monster running around the board.
Yeah, 5.5, 6.5, or yeah, five going from a 5.5, 2.5 to a 6.5, 2.5.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so yeah, this is one I really want to see in action. It's tough because these are small tournaments, not a ton of rounds, right? I come from Magic, the Gathering, where you know small Japanese tournament is a meme in Magic where the Japanese are incredible innovators. Oftentimes the future best deck usually comes from those tournaments, but also
It's hard,
three
right? It's hard to take them seriously.
in it, and 3 out of 4 of the ones that you test, if you hear top 8 at a small Japanese tournament, it's like this is either garbage or it's the new meta, but you don't know which, and you really don't know until you try it out. So I'm pretty curious with this list. All right, so I
So what's
wanted.
next?
This is the
Oh yeah,
last.
this was great.
Yeah, this is the last 3-in-1 list at Nova. Um, I'm really interested in it. So it's an Arch Revenant, two Kurnoth Hunters with Scythe, three Spite Revenants, two Tree Revenants. I got to talk with Eric a little bit in sort of the sort of cantina at Nova, and got to get some of his thoughts on this list. So I'm really interested, right? Because first of all, the thing that I think makes this list really compelling is the same thing that was compelling about those destruction soup lists. You have incredible utility and just abilities with all of your cheap fighters. So even in missions where they would normally be in a tough spot, they're still doing things. They're doing things all the time in every mission, which I think is really good. You've got a net in every deployment group. You've got these two teleports. I know that when he teleported with the treasure in round 2 on Cursed Relic, his opponent got very, very upset, because I think that the possibility of that hadn't occurred to him, and it felt completely broken at the time, which I imagine it does, right? The whole change to treasures to make them heavy to carry, that sort of reduces flight, reduces movement. The teleport, the Sylvaneth teleport, just ignores all of that. I asked him if he was trying to prove something by making it a pure list, and he actually just said he was going to bring the Adepticon winning list to Nova, the one that Kyle Hall won with.
Kyle.
Yeah, with a ton of Skaith's Wild Hunt stuff. And then 2.0 came. He couldn't do it, and so he just brought this instead as kind of a last minute audible. Which is really interesting because now that I know that he wasn't doing this because he was married to the idea of not having allies, I wanted to ask you guys, so this list had 15 points left. I put a little list up on the screen of some of the really compelling heroes in order that are around that points proposition. Are any of these kind of jumping out at you as something you'd want to sort of try out in place of one of the Kurnoths?
I don't think so, because Kurnoth Hunter with Scythe has 28 hit points, has 28 wounds.
Mm-hmm.
Part of what you want those Kurnoths to do is they're there to soak. They're huge melee threats, but they also soak a lot of wounds. Where a lot of the rest of your warband does not soak a lot of wounds. They're like the big guys that you want your chaff to try to be avoiding, because you're probably, you probably want to be trying to focus down the small things and trying to ignore those Kurnoths as best you can. If you swap to a little more fragile hero there on that list, then I think it changes your whole game plan, and maybe not necessarily for the better. I played against Jolly at Origins, and he had the Kurnoth Hunters, and I had to play very carefully around him since they were easily his heaviest hitters. And I wasn't trying to kill him. I was just trying to feed him chaff and try to just hold him off while I try to execute my game plan.
Interesting. Yeah. So one thing I'm finding a lot is picking your hammers to either kill chaff or to kill opposing hammers. And I do think with the Annihilator Prime, the Protector Prime, and the Evocator Prime here, the 3 Stormcast heroes, I have been finding that high toughness, because you're only giving up 3 wounds, I've been finding that 25 wounds on 6 toughness, or even 25 wounds on 5 toughness, is a little more durable in this edition than 28 wounds on 4. And they also do a little bit more damage too, because there's a lot of strength 5 running around in these destruction and chaos lists, at least anecdotally. Part of it's maybe because I played Beasts of Chaos, but then just in general, a lot of the non-order, sort of more kind of monster-leaning factions, a lot of them are running around with a lot of strength 5, and I've sort of been interested in having my hammers have toughness 5 to kind of be able to stand up to that kind of output that those that those blood kinds can put out, that those kind of big chaos monsters can put out, that the
There
big
might be,
greenskins can.
yeah, there might be something to do that. When and this is a future conversation we talk about Math Hammer and with us. We sort of right now we're still sort of weighting things more towards strength three, toughness three, a little bit of fives in there. I I think you're right though. I think things are moving a little bit more towards strength four, toughness four. And there was actually a video that just got posted today from the channel Optimal Game State. He kind of did a
Hmm.
little bit of breakdown of it with some graphs talking about where they sort of fall. And so like those weights could certainly be reevaluated. But in the absence of those, I've been kind of relying on just straight wounds as my primary metric for survivability, not the
Mm.
combination of wounds and toughness. I could be wrong or I could be oversimplifying it, but yeah, you very well could be right.
Yeah, so I'm excited to talk Math Hammer with you guys sometime on a more dedicated video to it because
Yeah.
I did for my tank rating for this edition. I took the top 400 sort of most damage efficient models. Once
Mhm.
we had this big spreadsheet, thank you to, I think it was, did you say it was Fred from your crew who did the,
Nope, Zach did our data
oh,
entry.
Zach did the hardcore data entry. Um, really
Zach is a
awesome. Once I
saint
saw
for that
that, I kind of,
spreadsheet.
what was that?
So Zach is a saint for doing that spreadsheet.
Yeah,
He
Yep.
worked
absolutely.
on it.
I kind of made my own version of it, porting in some of the raw characteristics, and grabbed what kind of basically anecdotally the things that I wanted to be killing, and then created a damage efficiency chart, and then charted the 400 best ones in the game out of the 1200 models that are in the game. So just took the top third, and then actually you get to kind of take the average DPA of each one against each toughness. And I was finding that toughness 5 and 6 really do make a difference in terms of how much damage you end up taking. So I would definitely personally lean towards one of these Stormcast heroes. I think Stormcast in general is just in a great spot right now, and
So
I'd be pretty excited to use them.
yeah, so maybe the Knight Zephyros then, based on the survivability. But then again, you got to kind of look at it as a whole, right? Do you want to give up that attack profile that the Kurnoth Hunter has? Because that's a 3-5 or 3-6 attack profile, and that so you're gonna be leaning hard on those heavy hitters to do some of your work too.
Yeah, I'm excited to be disagreeing with you so much because I really think it's all about the Annihilator Prime here, because it does just an absurd amount of damage. And the more I think about these Destruction Soup lists, now they have some movement shenanigans that just an Annihilator Prime on its own wouldn't be able to put together. But this is a very fast list in general, right? And man, these models that can never lose a fight, um, they are
Okay, if you're gonna
they are a
use, all right,
serious
well, okay,
problem.
without getting too deep into the theory crafting here
Hmm.
or the what ifs. You have a line Annihilator Prime with a Grand Hammer, but wouldn't you take one from the Warrior Chamber because they have a double that lets them scoot across the board a little bit faster?
Yeah, that's a good piece for the Protector Prime, because the Protector Prime also has 3 inches of range instead of two, which kind of gives you two ways to kind of make up for that slow 3 inch move there. Now you're not losing a ton of movement against those 4 inch move Kurnoth hunters, but yeah, bringing the Protector to have access to that
But without
double
an
might be a
ally,
good way to do
without
it.
a Tempest Eye ally to help speed you across the board,
Hmm.
Protector Prime has to rely on his own ability to help scoot across the board and get into the fight.
Yeah, I'd be interested. Obviously, the Protector Prime just like completely slaughters chaff models and even toughness 4 just left and right. The damage falls off so much against T5 and T6. I'd have to see, I don't actually have the Kurnoth Hunter damage profile because you'd be leaving one more Kurnoth Hunter in the list. So if the
Mm-hmm.
Scythe holds up really well against Toughness 6, I might then go with the Protector. But otherwise, you know, I just Man, that Annihilator dealing 9 damage to toughness 5 on average per activation is just wild to me.
The one thing I like to do, and this is again back to a Magic reference, is
Hmm.
if I see a list, oftentimes I will play the list verbatim just to get a feel for it before
Yeah,
I try to make my own
to
tweaks.
see what it needs.
I also like to do that.
That's true, because you could end up finding that actually the Arch Revenant isn't what's pulling its weight now that it's gone up 10 points, and then, flip to a Kurnoth Hunt Master for 215, and then, um, use those points to then have something else more in the 215 to 30 range to replace your Arch Revenant with. You could end up finding
Right.
that that's what you
Yeah,
want to do.
you put a flyer there or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. So a lot to kind of theory craft with what to do around the margins with Sylvaneth, but I do think that Eric found something really powerful with pairing 3 Spite Revs and 2 Tree Revs as kind of the core um, bodies in a list, and then just kind of figuring out which hammers best go with it. I think is a
And
fun project.
and one final thing. So I think someone in Discord asked about Sylvaneth today, actually, and I'm not sure. Is this a start collecting box as well?
It's not. So you used to be
Okay.
able to though. This was the Warcry. The Warcry box basically was 3 Kurnoth Hunters and 5 Revenants, and you could build the
Hmm.
Revenants however you wanted. So if you
And you just pick up Revenant somewhere and boom, you're done.
right, right. The problem
Yeah.
is that box isn't for sale anymore because it was such a great deal on the things that were good in Sylvaneth at the time in AOS. I don't know if Kurnoths and Revenants are still what people play in AOS. I have no idea. I think they use maybe more of the new models, um, but yeah, that box was not long for this world.
It was good and people liked it, so therefore it's gone.
Yeah, exactly. Um, I wanted to go through before we finish. I wanted to go through some other kind of fun lists to think about. The first one is this Death Soup list. It went 2-1 in Oslo, which you never know with a 2-1 record. Is that like actually something really amazing that got unlucky once, or is that just you're one dice roll away potentially from having been a 3-0 list, or it might have been one dice roll away from being 1-2, right? We don't know. Um, but I find it really fascinating. So it's the same Chosen of the King thing as Jason was running with his Terrorgeist list, which I want to ask you guys about. And then it also has the Dreadblade Harrow, which Warren, you had mentioned as being one of the really interesting allies in Death. What do you think of this list?
I was looking today because it had come up enough other times. I'm looking at Dreadblade Hero side by side with Crypt Flare, Crypt Infernal, etc. It's like a similar damage profile to a Crypt Flare with the additional trick, and you get coolness points for it too. Not gonna lie.
You do.
Um, yeah, I could see it. I kind of want my flyers to hit a little bit harder, but in 2.0, you're not going to get those monster hitting those dragons of 1.0 your. You know what
Right.
I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's that, and then also so dire wolves. I haven't played with dire wolves. I know the reaction for free rampage is nice. A lot of people swear by it. I'm not sold on a free rampage on a 1/3. I think it's a 1/3 damage profile. It's just a weak piece to get a free rampage out of, and it's just not. It doesn't really excite me. Fell bats I could see.
Yeah.
Dire wolves not so much. Just my opinion.
When I tested the direwolves with JJ, I'm not sure if you've met him, but
Yep.
beloved children's author JJ, we were not. He had some direwolves in his Slaves to Darkness list that he was testing out, and we weren't that happy with them because, like on an objective mission, for example, the direwolf will be there on the objective, perfectly fine. It's only a little bit more expensive than you'd want for that. But he was never able to leverage the reaction because I would just attack the direwolf because I just wanted to win numbers on the objective, and
Yeah,
that was the
it's
easiest
right.
part of it.
If you want to even up the activation count, it's a cheap piece, easy to knock off if you want to try to work on the activation count. I fight against a lot of warbands the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Just if I have a model advantage, leverage that model advantage, take out the weak pieces first. It's worth noting Direwolf can carry treasure.
Yeah, that's oh interesting. I didn't know it didn't have the
Yeah, they don't have
wrong
beast rune
rune
marks.
mark. Oh, funny.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm interested in this list. I think dire wolves are really attractive to me if you have a leader who is so important that your opponents are going to be attacking it before they attack the dire wolf. Like JJ had a dire wolf bodyguarding a Dark Oath War Queen, which is a pretty solid piece and one that it's tempting to bodyguard because the War
Oh, okay.
Queen
Yep, the
is
chaos one.
fairly fragile, but it's still not like you don't just run into a War Queen's face for free, right? Unless you've got a real plan to kill it in the first round and a half that you're going to do that. So it's not like something like, say, we'll talk about your master molder, but like that I could see a situation where I might, you know, run right at a master molder even if it had a chaos warhound nearby,
Mm-hmm.
and just you'd get free value from your warhound. But I don't know
I can
about,
see. Yeah, I can see
yeah.
using a Warhound to protect the War Queen. She is a piece we've found. Dave's played with her. It's a piece that
Mm-hmm.
sometimes needs protecting.
Yeah,
Okay.
even at like 5 toughness, 20 wounds, she still felt a little like she went down a little quick.
But when you set her up, she does work.
Oh, she's a blender. She'll she'll get her points back if you don't mess up.
On this list, the kind of the last thing you had mentioned that you want to see a little bit more damage coming out of your big flying pieces. One nice thing I think about this list, and I wanted to talk about Chosen of the King, this list can just spit out a ton of damage in certain situations if you pull off the combo. So, what do you guys think about the fact that we've seen two Flesh Eater Quartz lists that sort of got rid of the thing that was popular in 1.0 of the Crypt Flayers and went for going this Chosen of the King route with trying to kind of boost their Crypt Horrors combo style?
I'd have to give it another try. I've played a list in 1.0. Chosen the King worked a little bit differently back then. It worked with any hero. I had a horror and two infernals to go with a bunch of ghouls.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it was it was good, but the list had other holes in it. I think I was down to like 6 models or something like that. I had three big guys and like three small ghouls, and so the list overall needed kind of to go back to the drawing board to kind of like bump up the model count again. So I have to give it another shot. It was impressive though, going to 6 attacks, strength 4, 2/4 damage profile. It it was good. Um, Again, I have to kind of play with it again here to kind of see. And I think the Ghoul King Cryptor combo together is probably the right amount of points to get that combo. You don't want to be spending too many points to put that combo together, otherwise the rest of your warband suffers.
Yeah, and one cool thing about having the Harrow is even if they disrupt it by taking out one of the pieces, you know, you get to bring it back as long as you don't lose your Harrow. And maybe that's what they were thinking about by having dire wolves there. I don't can't tough to get into their head with that, but kind of an interesting piece here for folks thinking about building death war bands that aren't necessarily just based around a Terrorgeist or a zombie dragon. Kind of some cool other tech that you can try out. I also wanted to talk about Beasts of Chaos because I played against a this person. So we played in the semifinals. This person ended up 2-2, but had a pretty nice list with a Great Bray Shaman, two Bloodkinds, which are Bulgor leaders, and then a Dragon Ogre with the Warglaive, and two Bestigors. There's a lot to kind of talk about here, whether it's the Bestigor over regular Gore, whether it's the Bray Shaman pulls, but one of the things that I think is really interesting is, there are other ways to win my list only had two hammers. The Stormcast list, you could argue it either had only one hammer or you could even argue it had five hammers, right? Um, you could argue you can do full swarm lists, etc. But if you have three really scary combat pieces and some sort of shenanigans, you can compete in Warcry with the current setup. We saw that in a lot of these lists, um, and I think that's really interesting. Have you guys generally been gravitating towards lists like that? I know, uh, Warren, you could argue that the Skaven list that you thought about bringing, you could argue that that's kind of built along those lines. But
That's a three
what do you
threat list.
think?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
was playing two threat lists earlier, and
Hmm.
and kind of feeling it. Kind of feeling the need to kind of go towards your concept of like, hey, you got three legit threats, one in each group. It never feels good to skimp in a deployment group and have that group be the one that starts on the table and having to lean on it.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's just a natural offshoot of you got your three groups, so you want somebody in each group that can come in.
Yeah, and I think, like I said, there are lists that aren't doing it, right? But I think you just need a good reason, right? You don't have to go with the three threat kind of paradigm, but it's just something that you can fall
Like
back
if
on.
you have a monster, right? Like that's one concept. You're probably not going to have the points to have the body count and three threats and one in every group.
Right, exactly. Jason's list with the Terrorgeist, um, you could argue it sort of had three threats if you think the Ghoul King is a threat. It's a pretty weak one, but it basically had two big threats, but one of them was the most threatening thing in the tournament. So, um, yeah, I mean, that's a reason. If you're going to go with a real big swarm, that can be a reason. With my list, I felt like I didn't need a third hammer because I just had so much trust in my dwarves to kind of be able to hold their own. Um, so I didn't feel like I needed one. But yeah, just in general, I want people watching to just know, like, if you're kind of concerned about list building, um, if you're not sure, you can just go with three scary things and then think of some shenanigans to do around them. Now, the difference I think between a competitive three threat list and just one that will just work well in casual games but maybe won't be able to win a tournament is how how effective are the shenanigans you pair around them? Are you pairing them with some of the best chaff in the game? Are you pairing them with abilities that are going to just absolutely win games when executed well? Um, that's kind of where the sort of quality list building comes into it. But man, a ton of the successful lists we're looking at today are um, are kind of built along this paradigm. And then Andy was also playing two Bestigor. I know you guys on the Dayton Warcry Club have been talking a lot about being really interested in these 100 to 120 point sort of new, not really elite, not really chaff, kind of cheap mid range models. What do
Mid
you what
range,
do you
yeah.
think about the two Bestigor?
So yeah, if you look at the points, mid range models in general are the most points efficient ones in the game. Vestigor is no exception at 100 points there.
Mm-hmm.
You look at it point for point, it's more efficient than the chaff. It used to be the chaff was the most efficient thing you could do, which is why it was so good. And so one of the things I feel I feel like the mid range trap is mostly gone, or at least there's a narrow window where you don't want to be at, but mid range is not it. There's an expensive chaff window potentially that's where you don't want to be, but mid range I think is good. That said, the Bestigors, I like them on paper. I like their damage output on paper. I think I chatted with Andy or I chatted with someone else playing a Bestigor uh, on the Saturday narrative event and asked about it. I was scared of it. However, they did mention Bestigors are kind of glassy at 12 wounds at that 100 point model. Pretty easy to take them out. And so my thoughts on that have kind of changed. Maybe the right answer is just, pad out the body count with Gores again. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I was gonna say, to be honest, his list was really interesting and really cool and really tough to play against, but the Bestigors were awful. The best when I played against him, the Bestigors did not justify themselves, and I think that was probably a big part of the reason, why the game went the way it did. Now, is that damning for all of these mid-range chaff models? I don't think so.
I
I
don't I
think,
don't think so either.
yeah, but I do
The
think
thing to
it's
keep in
hard on
mind,
Bestigors specifically.
yeah, the thing to keep in mind. So it's 6 models, right? That's you're bordering around on an elite list right there.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're doing that, every one of those 6 models should be able to kind of hold its own in a fight. I think if you want to build a little bit more evenly, like a Stormcast, a 6-man Stormcast list. Every one of them can hold their own in a fight. The Vestigors might be kind of glassy. Great Bray Shaman combos really well, but maybe doesn't fight very well.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's a little lopsided. I'm not certain.
And I was also looking, like, if you look at comparative models, kind of both uh, above and below a Bestigor, I don't think a Bestigor is giving you 25 points worth of stuff over, say, a Demonet. But then you look at things that are only, say, 10 points more than a Bestigor or 15 points more than a Bestigor. Like, there's some Chaos
Mm-hmm.
Warriors that give you 1 more toughness, 3 more wounds, and are also really high damaging, right? Like the Chaos Warrior that's swinging 2 swords around.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah, the 120 pointer.
right.
Yeah.
And that one, that one's pretty incredible. Or you look at like Sequitors with shield. I don't think you can rely on them for damage purposes, but they're basically unkillable, right? They've got 20 wounds on 6 toughness coming on a 120 point model. And it just feels like, uh, specifically with Bestigors, and I think Andy was making a reasonable decision, being like, well, this is the most damage efficient cheap model, so I'll just run 2 of these instead of 3 Ghurs. But I think specifically for them, I think they're caught in a little bit of a dip. And you said something to me while we were just walking around at Nova, that you think that the mid-range trap has essentially shrunk. You kind of alluded to it here too, that it mostly went away, but not completely. That it's shrunk to more like this 80 to 100 point range. And I
Yeah,
think I
80 to
mostly,
90. Yeah.
yeah, and I think I would say that it includes going up to 100 points. I think that, you know, yeah, just to repeat before, I don't think sort of there's a dip here between a Demonet and, say, a Simbaresh Twin Soul with the Lash. That is a mid-range piece that I'm really into, or some of the cheap Stormcasts I think are really good. And then I think some of the kind of 75 point, the Spite Revenants, the chaff that do something really valuable, I think those are really solid too. But yeah, I wonder if I would have been, you know, 3 Ghur would have also been kind of a liability in Reaper, but I wonder if they would have been good enough in other scenarios to have been better than the 2 Bestigor, because those were just not worth their points when I played against this list.
Yeah, Dave, your bloodletters at 80 also kind of fall into that trap. That's like,
Yeah.
I classify it as expensive chaff. It's getting too expensive to spam, but you're not really getting what you feel like is 80 points worth out of them, right? With a 1/4 damage profile, or what's another good one? The Legionnaire shield guys,
Mm-hmm.
like 95 points for like a 1/4 damage profile. Sure, they're tough. Sure, they got some hit points, but they're not really putting out a lot of damage.
Yeah. Warren, the list that you were hoping to bring, you weren't able to make it in time for the event. But I was glad you showed up to be able to be there for the finals and to go out to dinner later. Um, Talk me through kind of your plans for this Skaven list that you would have played.
So this is the same plan that I played at Gen Con, leaning hard on Rat Ogre, Cracking the Whip, Master Molder, and Packmaster.
Mm-hmm.
The points went up, and so instead of having that 10 body count, I had to find something else. I had to find another plan, and this kind of gets into something we'll be talking about on our show. Changes in 2.0. high movement warbands got a lot of points increases across the board,
Yep.
and I feel that those high movement warbands, you can't play them as hordes anymore. I mean, um, cheap and fast are mutually exclusive now. So you have to lean into the elite. So Skaven are now an elite warband. Rat Ogres at a move 5, still one of the point for point most efficient beaters in the game, even more so backed up by Pack Masters. Storm Fiends also fall into that category. So I kept the core of that and uh, put in. So instead of skimping on the third deployment group, cut the Plague Monks, cut the Giant Rats, and put in a Death Master as legit for third threat. Add some speed to the list, and then a Storm Vermin with Halberd just to kind of fill it out. He can kind of just float around by himself. Hits okay. Can kind of survive in a fight. He's got a little bit of toughness to him. That was what I was going to do. I played it once before, and it felt really good. But then again, I was rolling hot on Rat Ogres,
Mhm.
so everything feels good when you roll hot on Rat Ogres.
One cool thing about the Pack Masters in this list, I think that the Skaven reaction might just be really good. And Pack Masters being able to burn one activation on the reaction and then still go because they're really mostly there for their ability. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think that kind of dynamic is really solid. I hope you get to
And
play
then
this, yeah, at a tournament sooner rather than later.
and there's also tricks involved with that too. Again, it may or may not come up, but there's tricks with the reaction to where you can pass on an activation to a rat ogre, give them a free move. The ogre can't be within a certain distance of the model that moved in to trigger the reaction, but you could have the rat ogre lateral over into something else. You can give free moves that way.
And with 5-inch range, you have a lot of ability to kind of mess around with that too.
Yeah, so the dream is right. You're passing on activations. So you're essentially getting free activations on your rat ogre. They're pinballing around the battlefield, just smashing things. At least that's how I envision it.
One of the
You
things I
know,
came away here is still thinking movement's really important, but it's important on your expensive pieces. And I don't think it's as important on your cheap pieces. Yeah, like you said, I think puts Skaven in a really interesting, really different place. They're kind of nothing like they were, and I think a lot of people have talked about, the potential death of elves with this edition. Uh, Saw a little bit of Lumineth in action across the weekend. It did not look pretty for them. Uh, so
all of the traditional move 5 and 6 have to kind of adapt a little bit. I think.
yeah, I think Chaos has a bunch of Move 5 cheap models that I would still play, but I haven't seen a single Move 5 model that's not in Chaos. That's, under 100 points that I'd be excited to play. It's really just the Demonettes and Zangors kind
Yep.
of holding the
Yep.
fort for that.
No, they're still those are still good, and Slanesh is still is as attractive as ever.
Yeah, do you guys have any kind of closing thoughts on all the lists that you saw?
There's more concepts out there. You kind of alluded to. You had mentioned, Soulblight Gravelords hordes, and I'm surprised you didn't put Justin's list on there. But that's something we'll let him keep the tech secret for now. But I think he was. I didn't ask his record. I think he smashed everybody for 2 days straight in narrative though with that list.
Yeah, I think he was 7-1 or something ugly like that. Yeah,
Oh my god.
yeah. He's a very competitive guy. He's fine to have in a narrative event because he's very friendly while he's
Yes,
destroying
he is.
people's narrative lists. But he does like to win and and knows how to. Let's just put it that way. For those who don't know, he did try out a Soulblight Gravelords all swarm
Yep.
list that
Yep. Graveguard spam.
yeah.
Uh, Plug for our channel if we're getting close to the outro here. Plug for our channel. I will probably mention that in our next in some list or in some way, shape, or form when we talk about 2.0 and changes in 2.0.
Everybody go if you love talking about Warcry, you want to hear it in Especially, I think the format that you guys use is really easy to love. As far as, like you get a good discussion in, and then, the people cry out for battle reports. And a lot of the time, you guys will have kind of a podcast style discussion and then go to a discussion of a battle that you guys had. And, you know, clever listeners can probably glean a lot of information about hearing the kind of back and forth about how a given battle goes. So yeah, everyone should check it out. I'll have the link down below. Um, yeah, anything I missed with the plug?
Or if you're in the southwestern Ohio area, we do have events. You don't have to be from Southwest Ohio, but it definitely would help. But yeah, we have events. We post them. We're trying to post them on Twitter, Reddit, in the Discord, just about any place social media gathers. We're posting.
Yeah, I haven't done the marketing for it yet. October 2nd at Epic Loot, another Sunday deal. We got the day locked in for that.
All you need to bring is yourself. So
Yep. If you want to borrow warband, we got warbands to borrow. We have 5 or 6. We have enough for at least 5 or 6 boards of terrain, so we can cover everybody that shows up.
I think we easily had 6 boards up last time.
Yep.
I don't think the mausoleum board ever even got used.
Nope.
Yeah, that's kind of the next. I'm really excited to see that as kind of the next step of Warcry organized play. Kind of creating these tournaments out of nowhere. I'm going to be looking to potentially figure out how to host a tournament myself in Minnesota. So that's all we've got for this list review session. I hope you all get a lot of info from this. Feel free, net listing is a dirty word, but I don't think it should be. I think it's perfectly reasonable to bring one of these to your next event. Just hopefully not your next narrative event. Some of these could be pretty mean in a narrative context, but if you've got some people who don't mind checking out or playing against a pretty tuned list, feel free to bring one of these. I hope you give it a try. So I'll be back with more kind of Warcry stuff in the future, and until then, may all your rolls be crits.